Without the trauma of witnessing his parents' death in Crime Alley, Bruce Wayne would have likely led a vastly different life. The pivotal moment in his childhood, the loss of his parents in front of his eyes, is what set him on the path toward becoming Batman, a figure consumed by his mission to seek justice for the helpless and to bring order to the chaos of Gotham. But in this alternate reality, what happens when that defining event never occurs? Would Gotham fall into ruin without the vigilante force known as Batman, or could other figures, whether heroes or institutions, step in to fill the vacuum? Bruce Wayne's childhood would remain fundamentally different without the trauma that would inspire him to don the cape and cowl. Raised in a world of wealth, privilege, and influence, Bruce would have likely grown into a man of business, perhaps taking over the reins of Wayne Enterprises earlier. The Wayne family would continue its legacy of philanthropy, providing Bruce with the resources and connections needed to make a positive impact in Gotham. Without the weight of vengeance pulling him down, Bruce's focus would shift toward expanding the philanthropic endeavors of Wayne Enterprises to influence Gotham through political means, public works, and corporate responsibility. He might have become a visionary businessman, building a network of resources and innovations to tackle Gotham's social issues. His influence would be used to guide Gotham through economic challenges, pushing for reforms that could potentially change the very foundation of the city's underworld. However, even with all his wealth and influence, Bruce Wayne would not be immune to Gotham's deep-rooted problems. The city's crime and corruption run deeper than the pockets of anyone who tries to change it from the top down. The loss of Batman means the city would still be plagued by its criminal underworld, and the mob bosses, such as Carmine Falcone, would remain the driving forces behind much of Gotham's violence and lawlessness. The Penguin, Two-Face, and Ra's al Ghul would still find Gotham a fertile ground for chaos and manipulation. Without the presence of a vigilante, they would continue to consolidate power, wreaking havoc without fear of reprisal from a masked figure in the shadows. Without Batman, Gotham would remain a city of sickening corruption, one where the GCPD remains just as vulnerable to bribes, manipulations, and fear. Commissioner Gordon would still fight against the tide of crime, but would likely face an uphill battle without the Dark Knight's interventions. In this world, Gordon's position would be more isolated and his efforts less effective. Batman's ability to navigate the underbelly of Gotham, gathering intel, taking down criminals, and shutting down criminal empires, would no longer be available to the city. In a way, without Batman's presence, Gordon may be forced to compromise more with the powers that be in Gotham, potentially weakening the moral fabric of the GCPD even further. Perhaps in this world, Gotham would have experienced a greater collapse in its attempts to fight corruption, with no masked hero to inspire people to rise above their fear and take action. Without Batman instilling fear in the criminal underworld, the likes of the Joker would grow even more powerful, with chaos reigning supreme. But in Bruce Wayne's absence, Gotham's citizens would still hold some hope that in this scenario may come from the institutions within the city, perhaps a revitalized GCPD, or other figures stepping up to fight the tide of corruption, though their struggle would be far more difficult without the Dark Knight's constant presence. The absence of Batman also fundamentally changes the trajectory of Gotham's villains. The Joker, whose identity is as intertwined with Batman as the Bat itself, would likely find a different path in this reality. The Joker thrives on chaos, and without the Batman to act as his antagonist, he would likely escalate his violent antics against Gotham's innocent. His need for Batman's destruction would fade, but his lust for anarchy would still push him to create chaos in new ways. Perhaps the Joker would even find a new rival to challenge him, a figure who, in the absence of Batman, might push him toward new heights of destruction. He would likely target Gotham's political institutions or attempt to tear down the social structures that govern the city. But with no Batman to contain his madness, Gotham would face a greater degree of unpredictability and random violence than ever before. Without Batman, the criminal underworld would also continue to evolve. Carmine Falcone would remain the powerful figure in Gotham's organized crime, with the Gotham Mafia growing even more powerful in the absence of a figure like Batman to disrupt their operations. Sal Maroni and other mob bosses would not have the same level of resistance that they faced with Batman in the picture. Batman's presence as a constant thorn in the side of Gotham's underworld would no longer exist, which could lead to a more organized, powerful mafia and perhaps the rise of new figures in the underworld who could rival Falcone. Gotham, without the vigilante Batman, would likely see a rise in radicalism. People desperate for change, for someone to fight against the corruption and decay of the city, might turn to alternative means. New heroes might emerge, but they would not have the same guiding force as Bruce Wayne. There could be an idealistic figure who attempts to fight for justice without the level of moral complexity Batman brings. However, these figures might find themselves quickly overwhelmed by the brutal realities of Gotham. Without the Dark Knight, Gotham might also see a political shift. Wayne Enterprises would likely become more involved in public policy in the absence of Bruce's dark alter ego. His philanthropic work could influence political decisions, with his family legacy being a stabilizing force in the city. However, the Wayne legacy would be marked by a lack of the direct action that Batman brings, and Bruce's personal commitment to changing the city through charitable means might not be enough to tackle the systemic problems that plague Gotham. Bruce Wayne's life without Batman would leave him open to more personal growth and an emotionally fulfilling existence. Without the constant weight of the Batman persona, Bruce might find peace in his relationship with Gotham. However, he would remain unable to escape his past, always haunted by the absence of his parents and the unresolved trauma that still lingers beneath the surface. Gotham, without Batman's dark influence, might see alternative solutions to the chaos. But at what cost? Without the symbol of Batman to counter the endless tide of corruption, the question remains, could Gotham truly survive without its most powerful protector? Without Batman, Gotham continues to spiral into uncertainty, but this shift does not merely create a power vacuum in which crime thrives unchecked. Bruce Wayne's absence from Gotham's shadows might have sparked a subtle transformation in the city's fabric, a new era of lawlessness, sure, but one where Gotham's citizens, institutions, and even its villains evolve in unexpected ways. Gotham, by nature, is a city built on a delicate balance between corruption, suffering, and the human spirit's resilience. In the absence of its dark protector, the ripple effects affect more than just the criminals on the streets. Gotham, a city that thrives on paradoxes, would begin to react, evolve, and find its own path, even without its hero. One of the most significant consequences of Bruce Wayne never becoming Batman is the impact on Gotham's crime syndicates. Without the threat of a shadowy vigilante, the mob families and criminal organizations that once feared Batman's intervention could potentially take full control of the city. Carmine Falcone, who once held sway over Gotham's underworld, would likely expand his reach with fewer constraints, perhaps even becoming more public with his activities. Gotham, without Batman to challenge the dominance of figures like Falcone or Maroni, would descend into deeper corruption, giving rise to more ruthless figures in the criminal world. But Gotham's criminals, especially those who are known to thrive in the anarchy Batman represents, would find themselves facing an entirely new set of circumstances. The Joker, for example, is intricately tied to the very existence of Batman. His obsession with creating chaos and testing the limits of morality and sanity is made possible only through his relationship with the Dark Knight. Without Batman as his antagonist, the Joker's existence becomes more volatile. He might still revel in creating anarchy, but without Batman to serve as a mirror to his madness, he would likely face even more frenzied responses from other criminals or even the government itself. In this world, the Joker might turn to public terrorism, targeting not just Gotham's criminal class, but anyone he deems worthy of his madness. Without Batman's influence, the Joker could evolve into a much more public figure, perhaps even leading his own faction, a band of chaos-driven anarchists. The Penguin, whose operations revolve around the Gotham elite and their vulnerabilities, would likely continue his efforts to control the city. But without the threat of Batman disrupting his plans, he would be able to move even more freely. The mob's success, coupled with Penguin's ability to infiltrate and influence the highest echelons of Gotham society, would mean that corporate crime becomes an even more powerful force. Wayne Enterprises, without Bruce Wayne's leadership and Batman's clandestine actions to disrupt criminal schemes, might end up being a corporate pawn manipulated by the criminal elite. In a city where the vigilante force of Batman is absent, the police in Gotham are left to fight the battle against crime on their own. While Gordon remains steadfast, without Batman's backup, his efforts become far more limited. The GCPD, although well-intentioned, are still susceptible to corruption, and without Batman to expose those who are complicit in criminal activity, the police force becomes increasingly ineffective. The police might still try to enforce the law, but they would likely find themselves fighting an uphill battle against a city rife with criminal empires, organized syndicates, and the growing despair of the common people. Gotham might see an increase in the police state, a more militarized response to crime, but this would also create a new level of fear among citizens who, without Batman's guiding force, would see themselves as helpless against both criminals and the very authorities meant to protect them. On the other side of Gotham, without the presence of a shadowy protector in the night, the ordinary citizens of Gotham might fall into a state of despair. With mob control and anarchy expanding, many would lose faith in any hope of recovery. This hopelessness could drive the disenfranchised to take to the streets, as vigilante figures could rise, but these new figures might not have the same moral compass as Batman. The loss of Batman could give birth to even more dangerous self-styled heroes, perhaps ruthless and driven by vengeance without the restraint that Batman showed. Gotham, no longer defined by the quiet, resolute figure of the Dark Knight, would quickly see itself embroiled in a cycle of bloodshed, as each new vigilante competes for power, glory, and justice. The absence of Batman would also significantly alter the relationship between Bruce Wayne and his closest allies. Without the mask of Batman to hide behind, Bruce Wayne would likely be forced to deal with the emotional void left in the wake of his parents' murder in a much different manner. Perhaps Bruce Wayne would focus more intensely on Wayne Enterprises, building it into a corporate titan, but his sense of guilt and loss might turn him into a shadow of his former self. His relationship with Alfred could become more strained as Alfred continues to try and guide Bruce toward a sense of peace, a peace that seems increasingly impossible for Bruce to reach. Bruce might even become more disconnected from Gotham's struggles, unsure of how to connect with his legacy and uncertain of his place in the city. Additionally, Gotham's vigilante figures could be impacted without Batman as their leader. For instance, Robin or Batgirl, who could have been shaped by Batman's guidance, would have to find their own paths. Would they fall prey to the same darkness and chaos that defines Gotham? Would they become self-absorbed heroes, less inclined to the sense of justice Batman would have instilled in them? The absence of their mentor, someone who kept them grounded, would likely lead to a chaotic redefinition of their roles in the city. They might grow disillusioned or take on more extreme methods of vigilante justice, possibly even crossing the line themselves. As Bruce Wayne never takes up the mantle of Batman, Gotham would likely face its greatest crisis in the form of a power vacuum that allows the city to fall further into chaos. However, the most profound consequence is the missing icon that would be central to the world of superheroes. The Joker, Riddler, Bane, Ra's al Ghul, and countless other villains who were all once countered by Batman would still remain active, but their primary adversary, the one who keeps them in check, would be gone. Gotham, without its Dark Knight, would find itself in perpetual crisis, where the line between hero and villain becomes increasingly blurred, and the battle for Gotham's soul becomes less about the individual fighting crime, but about a city that loses itself entirely to its darker instincts. Without Batman, Gotham begins to fracture in ways that would have been inconceivable had its protector ever donned the cowl. The absence of the Dark Knight creates a power vacuum that spreads far beyond the city's streets. Gotham's criminal underworld, once contained by Batman's vigilant presence, rises to new heights of influence, while its citizens spiral into deeper despair and violence. However, Bruce Wayne's legacy, or the lack of it, carries its own set of consequences, even beyond the shadows of Gotham. Without Bruce Wayne as Batman, the city's social fabric begins to unravel. While the Wayne Foundation might continue its philanthropic endeavors, trying to alleviate the economic disparities that contribute to Gotham's cycle of crime, the absence of Batman's influence would leave a gaping hole in the moral authority needed to bring real change. The city needs someone to rally behind, someone who can serve as a symbol of justice. Without Batman, Gotham lacks its most significant symbol of hope, and the people, as always, turn to their most familiar, their darkest instincts. Without the constant threat of a masked figure patrolling the streets, the criminal world would have the freedom to flourish in a way it never could before. Carmine Falcone would strengthen his empire, recruiting more henchmen and spreading his influence across Gotham's political landscape. Maroni's syndicate would grow bolder, and the underworld would fill the void left by Batman, creating new factions and power structures that feed on Gotham's corruption. The absence of Batman allows the Mafia to once again dominate, pushing Gotham further into the hands of organized crime. This leads to an even greater social divide, where only the elite seem to thrive while the rest of the population struggles to survive. In the absence of Batman, the Gotham City Police Department, GCPD, faces its own moral quandaries. Commissioner Gordon, a stalwart defender of Gotham's integrity, finds himself even more alone in the fight against corruption and crime. Without Batman, the GCPD would be stretched thin, infiltrated by criminals, and compromised by the very forces they fight. Gordon, left without the help of Gotham's greatest asset, would have to rely more heavily on political alliances, perhaps compromising his integrity to secure resources and political influence. Without the Dark Knight, Gordon's role as the moral compass of Gotham becomes increasingly difficult to uphold. New vigilantes might rise to take the place of Batman, but their methods would be unrefined, uncoordinated, and perhaps dangerous. Some could be well-intentioned but overly zealous, acting out of a desire for revenge rather than true justice. Others might be driven by ego, competing for the role of Gotham's hero, but none could embody the selflessness that Batman did. Without a master tactician to guide Gotham's defense, these new figures may become tools of chaos themselves, perhaps crossing the very line Batman fought to avoid. Batgirl, Nightwing, and other figures who might have once been Batman's allies would either remain disconnected from Gotham's core struggles or turn toward more independent routes that risk compromising their values. Then there is the symbol of hope that Gotham loses, the bat signal. The signal was more than just a call to action for the vigilante. It was a moral statement, a beacon that indicated that no matter how dark the city became, there was always a chance for justice. Without Batman, the symbol ceases to have meaning. The signal no longer unites the people in their pursuit of a better Gotham. It becomes a reminder of Gotham's failure, of the heroes who were never enough to stop the overwhelming tide of crime and corruption. In a Gotham without Batman, the bat signal might even become a faded relic, seen only as a symbol of lost hope and abandoned ideals. The Joker, Batman's greatest adversary, would also find his place in this alternate world. Without Batman, the Joker's existence would shift from one of chaos versus order to a more unpredictable and self-destructive force. He would still create anarchy, but he would have no counterbalance in Batman, no dark reflection to truly test his chaotic philosophy. Without Batman's moral restraint, the Joker could become more unhinged and destructive, targeting the city as a whole and perhaps even becoming a terrorist figure, operating on a much larger scale than his usual antics. The absence of Batman leaves Gotham even more vulnerable to the Joker's madness, as the city's moral compass is now defunct. However, it is also possible that the Joker, without the constant battle with Batman, could eventually grow bored of the city. Without a worthy adversary, the Joker might spiral further into madness, eventually destroying himself. In this case, his legacy would still haunt Gotham, but the city would be freed from the Joker's endless pursuit of chaos. The constant conflict between Batman and Joker had given Gotham an edge against complete devastation. With Batman absent, Gotham might either grow worse or be forced to adapt in new ways, learning how to fight its battles without the madness of Joker's influence. The absence of Batman also leaves a gaping hole in the social order that Gotham could never fill. Bruce Wayne's connection to Gotham's elite, his standing in the business world, and his philanthropic endeavors had always been connected to his alter ego. Without the Batman, Wayne Enterprises would have a different trajectory. Bruce's wealth, although still used for philanthropic purposes, would likely be funneled into the hands of the corrupt elite or even fall under the influence of the mob bosses that would have gained more control over Gotham's economy. Wayne Enterprises might continue as a successful corporation, but its moral foundation would likely erode without the force of Bruce Wayne's personal commitment to justice. Gotham would be increasingly controlled by the criminal class, unable to reclaim its soul without Bruce Wayne's guiding hand. Gotham's growing sense of decay would be mirrored by Bruce Wayne's internal struggles. Without the mask of Batman, Bruce Wayne might still carry the burden of his parents' death, but without the outlet of his vigilantism, he would struggle to find a purpose. His guilt and loss could weigh even more heavily upon him, turning him into a tragic figure, a man with the power to change the world, but who never truly understands how. As the injustice in Gotham grows, Bruce might eventually lose hope, retreating into the privileged life of the wealthy elite. Without Batman's drive to push him beyond his limitations, Bruce Wayne might lead a life that is filled with emptiness and regret. In this world, Bruce never reaches his full potential. He remains a man who could have been Gotham's greatest force for good, but never found a way to channel his pain and passion into meaningful change. He might still care deeply for Gotham, but his lack of action, his refusal to take up the mantle of Batman, would leave him as an unfulfilled figure, someone who represents lost potential rather than the hope that Gotham desperately needs. In this alternate reality where Bruce Wayne never became Batman, Gotham continues to evolve in ways that are both foreboding and unexpected. Without the looming presence of the Dark Knight, Gotham's destiny remains uncertain. The criminal forces that once feared Batman's intervention now grow in strength and influence. In this world, the gangs, mob families, and supervillains do not fade into irrelevance, but instead they adapt and mature into even more complex and dangerous factions. Gotham, which was once teetering on the brink of complete chaos, begins to experience a new breed of criminal governance, one that sees the city as a game of power rather than a battleground for revenge. Carmine Falcone and Sal Maroni, now unchallenged by the threat of Batman, solidify their grip on Gotham's underworld. With the absence of the vigilante, the mob bosses would find themselves unchecked and able to expand their control over every political, economic, and social institution in the city. Falcone, whose operations are based on the Gotham elite's reliance on secrecy and power, could build a more organized, deeply embedded network that controls everything from the police force to City Hall. Maroni's rise, too, could lead to an even more ruthless mafia empire, with an ever-expanding web of corruption where the law becomes a commodity to be bought and sold. But it's not just the traditional criminal elements that thrive. Without Batman's constant interference, Gotham's supervillains grow bolder. The Joker, who once lived to create chaos for the Dark Knight, finds himself without a worthy opponent, at least, not one who can keep him in check. Gotham's most infamous madman would likely spiral into bigger, more violent schemes, targeting not just the city's infrastructure, but the people themselves. With no Batman to keep him at bay, the Joker's anarchy would spread like wildfire, eventually igniting an explosion of terror that would tear the very fabric of Gotham's social order apart. Without Batman's interference, the Joker could even find himself as an influential figure in Gotham's criminal hierarchy. His need for chaos could manifest as a master manipulator, pitting criminal organizations against each other to maximize his enjoyment of conflict and destruction. Without Batman to counterbalance his actions, the Joker could create a far more destructive and lasting legacy in Gotham, one that would define the city for generations. This vacuum of power also leaves Gotham open to other villains rising to prominence. Two-Face, with his belief in the duality of fate and justice, might continue his crime spree, but without Batman as his constant adversary, his struggle with his identity becomes more pronounced. His moral ambivalence might lead him to try to control Gotham's underworld, using his coin flip philosophy to impose his own twisted sense of justice. He could become a force in political life, making decisions that affect the very core of Gotham's stability, driving others to question what real justice means in a city so consumed by duality. Ra's al Ghul, whose belief in the destruction and rebirth of Gotham is already an established ideology, would likely see the city's decay as a perfect opportunity to push forward his vision of total annihilation, followed by rebirth. With no Batman to stand in his way, Ra's could reshape the city's fate, setting the stage for a global recalibration of Gotham's place in the world. His League of Shadows could infiltrate Gotham on a larger scale, slowly moving toward their goal of overthrowing the corrupt system of governance. Gotham's fragile foundation could crumble under the weight of Ra's al Ghul's insatiable desire for destruction, and with no Batman to stop him, the city could eventually face a catastrophic collapse that would make its eventual recovery impossible. As for Gotham's heroes, without Batman's moral framework, they would find themselves struggling to understand their place in this city of perpetual chaos. Robin and Batgirl, left without their mentor, would likely try to take action, but their efforts would be filled with uncertainty and danger. They might try to fight for Gotham, but lacking the discipline and the strategic mind that Batman provided, they would likely find themselves out of their depth, unable to hold their ground against the powerful criminal forces that have grown unchecked. As they grapple with their identities, both could go down paths that might lead them to dangerous extremes, blurring the line between justice and vengeance. If Bruce Wayne never became Batman, his personal struggles with grief and loss would have a very different expression. With no mask to hide behind, Bruce's grief might manifest in different ways. He might become even more withdrawn, focusing all his energy on Wayne Enterprises and expanding its influence. The philanthropy that his family legacy was known for might be carried on, but Bruce's lack of an outlet for his emotional turmoil could lead him into anxiety, depression, and resentment. His parents' death would never be avenged, and without the Dark Knight's purpose to guide him, Bruce might never find peace with his past. While Wayne Enterprises would likely grow under Bruce's management, his personal life could suffer. He may never come to terms with his trauma, leading to a lifeless existence full of regret. With no Batman to anchor him, Bruce might never realize that his true legacy was never in business or wealth, but in the symbol he could have become to the city, the hope he could have provided. In the broader context of the world of superheroes, Bruce's absence could alter the very fabric of the Justice League. Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and the other members of the Justice League would still face global threats, but Batman's strategic mind would be missed. His absence would leave a gaping hole in the team, one that no other member could fill. Without Batman, the Justice League might not function as efficiently, and their global reach would be more disjointed. Batman's expertise in detective work, combat strategy, and his ability to uncover secrets would be sorely lacking, and while the League would still work together, their efforts might be less coordinated, with larger threats going unnoticed or unaddressed. However, Bruce's legacy would still linger in Gotham, even if he never took up the mantle of the Bat. The Wayne family name would continue to be a beacon of hope and generosity, but its influence might be overshadowed by the dark forces that gain power in the city. Gotham might still look to the Wayne Foundation for help, but the city's soul would remain shattered without the figure of Batman to keep the darkness at bay. As the absence of Batman continues to reverberate throughout Gotham and beyond, the long-term consequences of Bruce Wayne's decision to never take on the mantle of the Dark Knight grow ever more apparent. The city of Gotham, without its protector, falls deeper into a chaotic spiral, with each passing year seeing a more entrenched criminal element controlling its streets. Yet, even as Gotham becomes a hotbed of violence, there are still those who rise to try and fight for justice, albeit without the guidance and discipline that Batman provided. The mob families continue to grow in strength, and new figures from the criminal world emerge, sensing that Gotham is theirs for the taking. Carmine Falcone and Sal Maroni, previously held in check by Batman's unpredictable presence, now extend their control further. Falcone's empire becomes more entrenched, and Maroni's reach spreads into political and economic circles, making it impossible for the GCPD to maintain any form of meaningful control. The police, already infiltrated and overwhelmed by corruption, become even more disjointed, with only Commissioner Gordon remaining a moral beacon, though his resources and influence are now severely limited. In this darkened Gotham, A sense of moral decay pervades every corner of the city. Without the figure of Batman to hold up as a symbol of hope, the city's citizens are left to choose between surviving and compromising. A sense of helplessness spreads as people look to the government, police, and corporate entities for salvation. But with Wayne Enterprises either remaining untouched by the criminal underworld or, at best, co-opted by it, Gotham's economic recovery would be extremely slow. Even Bruce Wayne, despite his immense wealth and position, finds himself unable to directly impact the system in any meaningful way. Without the guiding influence of Batman, a new wave of vigilantes starts to appear, but their actions are disjointed and often self-serving. Gotham's citizens, once inspired by Batman's dedication, now face a patchwork of new protectors who do not share Batman's core principles of restraint and moral clarity. These new figures, while heroic in some respects, often fail to see the larger picture. Some might be driven by a desire for revenge, while others may operate with questionable methods. Without Batman's discipline and leadership, Gotham's efforts to fight its criminal scourge become disorganized, fragmented, and ultimately ineffective. Instead of uniting Gotham's citizens under a single banner of hope, these would-be heroes often become chaotic forces, often contributing to the problem rather than solving it. For Robin, Nightwing, and others who may have been influenced by Batman, the absence of a mentor leaves them rudderless. Without Batman's moral compass and strategic insight, their fight against crime becomes far more dangerous. Nightwing, once trained to be the next Batman, might stray from his original mission, becoming more focused on personal justice than the greater good of Gotham. Without the voice of reason that Batman provided, Nightwing's methods may become more brutal, and his connection to Gotham's crime-fighting mission would be questionable at best. Without the guidance and balance Batman brought, he might even fall prey to the same obsession that fueled Bruce's descent into vigilantism in the first place. Batgirl, too, might face similar struggles, perhaps distancing herself from the greater mission of Gotham's protection in favor of personal redemption. Gotham's heroism would be significantly diluted without Batman. While the GCPD would continue to fight the criminals of Gotham, they would do so without the same strategic insight and tactical superiority that Batman provided. Commissioner Gordon, while still one of Gotham's last remaining forces for good, would find himself increasingly isolated from his moral center. Without the regular intervention of the Dark Knight, his efforts might appear increasingly fruitless to the people of Gotham. Gordon, still committed to the idea of justice, would struggle to retain the trust of the citizens, especially in a city so deeply divided between the ruling elite and the oppressed masses. On the criminal side, Gotham's villains, most notably the Joker, Two-Face, and Ra's al Ghul, find themselves with fewer obstacles. Without the Batman to disrupt their plans, their ambitions grow in both scope and ruthlessness. The Joker, devoid of his most personal adversary, might shift to a more global agenda, creating terror not just in Gotham, but throughout the world. In the absence of a moral foil like Batman, the Joker might even look for more ambitious targets, feeling emboldened by the freedom Gotham provides. Meanwhile, Ra's al Ghul, with his ultimate goal of destroying Gotham and rebuilding it anew, might find his cause more easily advanced without the Dark Knight to oppose him. Ray's vision of a new world order could be imposed on Gotham through more subtle means, through corporate manipulation, economic collapse, and political corruption. Without the interference of Batman, Ra's might succeed in toppling the city and rebuilding it according to his ideals. However, with no Batman to ultimately challenge him, Ra's al Ghul might eventually discover the same flaw that defines all of Gotham's villains, the insatiable thirst for control. While Bruce Wayne might have continued his life as a billionaire businessman, he would find himself increasingly consumed by a sense of loss. The trauma of his parents' deaths, never fully addressed by his crusade as Batman, might still haunt him in subtle ways. His refusal to act as Batman leaves a hole in his identity, and over time he could become disillusioned with the world he once tried to change. Wayne Enterprises would likely continue to thrive, but Bruce would remain numb to its operations. His personal sense of justice might shift toward more charitable public policy and economic solutions, but these would lack the depth and impact that his role as Batman would have allowed. Bruce might even find himself growing more disconnected from Gotham's needs, distracted by his own sense of moral failure and guilt. The lasting legacy of Bruce Wayne would not be as a symbol of justice, but as an unrealized potential. Gotham would never have the vigilante it needed, and without that guiding force, the city would never fully heal. Batman, the Dark Knight, had been a necessary balance in a city that was always on the edge of collapse. Without him, Gotham would have learned to survive, but it would have lost the spark of hope that once held it together. Bruce Wayne, despite his wealth, legacy, and intelligence, would never become the man that Gotham needed. Inaction would become his true legacy, and Gotham would forever be defined by the chaos that he failed to contain. As Gotham continues to descend further into chaos, the absence of Batman begins to carve out even more profound consequences for both the city's future and Bruce Wayne's place in it. Gotham's criminal element grows bolder, and the city's elite increasingly align themselves with organized crime, leaving Gotham in a state of moral decay. Without Batman's ever-watchful eye, Gotham's trajectory shifts from one of potential redemption to one of irreversible decline. The GCPD remains underfunded and increasingly undermined by corrupt officers, unable to mount a real challenge against the sprawling criminal syndicates that continue to infiltrate the city's power structures. Commissioner Gordon, though steadfast in his moral conviction, finds himself isolated in a sea of corruption. Without Batman, Gordon's influence is limited. Even his role as a key figure in Gotham's defense begins to fade as he faces mounting pressure to compromise with the criminal forces around him. Gordon, unable to trust his own police force, becomes more desperate, seeking alternative methods to keep Gotham from falling into complete ruin. However, without Batman's ability to dismantle organized crime from the shadows, Gotham's deep-rooted problems grow worse. It's not just the police force that feels the absence of Batman. The citizens of Gotham, too, struggle to find hope. Without the symbol of Batman to inspire them to rise above the fear and violence, many begin to succumb to despair. Gotham's neighborhoods, once divided, grow even more segregated. The downtrodden turn to gangs for protection, and corruption spreads through every level of society. Without Wayne Enterprises actively disrupting criminal empires or providing the hope of justice, the elite in Gotham become even more powerful and untouchable, while the common people continue to live in fear. What's even more striking is the way Gotham's villains evolve, without Batman to keep them in check. Gotham's most notorious figures become even more dangerous. The Joker, in particular, grows in influence. Without his mortal enemy, he embarks on more extreme acts of terrorism, pushing Gotham to the brink of destruction. His need for chaos becomes a driving force in the city's ongoing downfall. In the absence of a figure who embodies order, justice, and the fight against corruption, the Joker finds a new audience for his madness. He mobilizes the disenfranchised citizens of Gotham, turning them into followers of his anarchic philosophy. The city, already struggling, is now actively tearing itself apart at the hands of its most unpredictable villain. the Joker's rise is not the only threat. Ra's al Ghul, ever obsessed with the idea of Gotham's destruction, sees an opportunity to push his agenda of rebuilding the world through total chaos. Without Batman to oppose him, Ra's could succeed in bringing about the destruction of Gotham. He could infiltrate Gotham's power structures, using Wayne Enterprises as a front to achieve his end goal of bringing about the city's collapse so that it can be reborn under his control. Gotham's destruction becomes inevitable without Batman to stop the process. Meanwhile, Two-Face's journey is another that would evolve without Batman's influence. In a world without Batman's moral code to keep him grounded, Harvey Dent might ultimately become the very thing he once fought against. His descent into madness is one of self-doubt and moral compromise, and without Batman's hand to guide him, he might not even find his purpose in balancing justice. Instead, he could become a figure of total instability, tearing at the very fabric of Gotham's legal system. Two-Face's coin could dictate more than just his fate. It could start dictating the fate of the entire city, enforcing a twisted sense of chance over justice. Without Batman to hold up the fragile equilibrium in Gotham's underworld, even smaller-time criminals rise to prominence. The Penguin, once known as a factional crime boss, could ascend to being one of the most influential figures in Gotham. He would use his charm, ruthlessness, and connections with Gotham's elite to fortify his control over the city, using Wayne Enterprises and other institutions to feed his empire. Gotham might find itself being ruled by crime syndicates, corrupt corporations, and political puppets who care nothing for the well-being of its citizens, only for their own power and wealth. This shift in Gotham's criminal landscape would drastically affect the city's governance. Political corruption would skyrocket without Batman to expose the dark secrets that underpin the system. Mayoral candidates and city councilmen who once operated in the shadows would no longer have to worry about being held accountable as Gotham's power structure becomes entirely controlled by crime. Without Batman's constant threat, they can manipulate the city's laws and influence police and public servants to serve their own interests. Batman's absence would lead to the total erosion of public trust in the system, leaving Gotham vulnerable to a takeover by those who thrive in corruption. Without the symbolic importance of Batman as a moral figure, Gotham's heroes become fragmented, unsure of their role in the world. Dick Grayson, known as Robin or Nightwing, might grow disillusioned with his mentor's absence. His fight for justice could be motivated by personal vengeance, as he might be unable to shake the feeling that he is still trapped in the shadow of his mentor's legacy. His attempts to protect Gotham could become reckless, driven by a desire to fill the void that Batman left behind, but without the discipline and clarity that Batman instilled in him. The same can be said for Barbara Gordon, known as Batgirl, who without Batman's guidance may start to question the meaning of her mission. Without Batman to provide leadership, Batgirl could face an emotional crisis about the efficacy of her role in Gotham. Her actions could become more radical as she struggles to find her own identity in a city that is slipping away from any semblance of order. Alfred Pennyworth, who once stood by Batman as his father figure, also faces the deeply different life without Bruce's mission. Without Bruce's constant internal battle, Alfred would find himself increasingly isolated in his attempts to console Bruce or push him to rise above his trauma. Alfred's role as a caretaker shifts, as he may even feel more guilty for not being able to inspire Bruce to embrace a different path. His own moral compass might waver as he's left to watch Gotham's inevitable downfall. The absence of Bruce as Batman may tear apart their relationship, leaving Alfred wondering whether he failed in his role as a parental figure to Bruce. Finally, Bruce Wayne, having no outlet for his grief and rage, becomes a hollow shell of the man who could have been Gotham's savior. With his personal pain unacknowledged, Bruce might sink into greater apathy, overwhelmed by the guilt of his decision not to take up the mantle of Batman. In this world, Bruce is haunted by the knowledge that he could have been more, but chose not to. His legacy, once full of potential, is now that of a man who wasted his chances at making a true difference. He might resign himself to this reality, throwing himself into corporate life to bury his emotions, all while Gotham grows more lost in its battle for survival. As Gotham continues to sink deeper into its spiral of chaos, the consequences of Bruce Wayne's decision not to become Batman ripple out into unforeseen territories. With Batman absent, the city faces a growing crisis of identity. The criminal underworld flourishes without restraint. The moral compass of Gotham becomes increasingly fractured, and the people are left with a growing reality that they are alone in a city of crime and decay. But the most profound consequence of Bruce Wayne's inaction lies in the long-term consequences it brings to both the city and to him personally. Without Batman to provide a check on Gotham's darkest tendencies, the city's political landscape becomes deeply entrenched in corruption. Gotham's government becomes more openly controlled by criminal interests, with city officials, including the mayor and judges, now working openly under the sway of the mob families. The law becomes a commodity to be bought and sold, with Falcone and Maroni finding themselves increasingly empowered in the halls of Gotham's justice system. The Gotham City Police Department, GCPD, already struggling with its own issues of corruption, becomes nearly ineffective as the lines between law enforcement and criminal enterprise begin to blur. Police officers are either complicit, bribed, or unable to fight against the overwhelming power of the criminal syndicates controlling the streets. Without the interference of Batman in their operations, mob bosses like Falcone expand their influence into every corner of Gotham, from local politics to real estate to corporate affairs. The city's infrastructure is dominated by the criminal elite, with the wealthy and powerful colluding with the underworld to maintain the status quo. Wayne Enterprises, with Bruce Wayne's focus elsewhere, either becomes more passive in its operations or is taken over by these criminal interests as a tool to further spread corruption and control over Gotham's economy. The city's economy would become rigged, designed to benefit only those who already hold power, while the middle class suffers and the poor find themselves increasingly marginalized. Gotham's economy deteriorates even further as investment dries up and businesses fail under the crushing weight of corruption. The people, once hopeful that they might have a future in Gotham, begin to flee in larger numbers, but the absence of Batman's symbol of hope means there is no anchor to hold them in place. Gotham's soul becomes progressively lost, and without the inspiration that Batman would have brought, the city descends into a grander state of decay. The city's villains, who once danced around the edges of Gotham's criminality, become more central figures in the chaos that overtakes the streets. Ra's al Ghul, whose long-term vision for Gotham's destruction and rebirth could never come to fruition under Batman's watch, sees his window of opportunity widen. With the city's weak governance and fractured resistance, Ra's might activate his League of Shadows to implement his plan. Gotham's infrastructure would become ripe for sabotage, as Ra's al Ghul looks to bring the city to its knees and remake it according to his vision. Gotham, once so tightly controlled by Batman's vigilance, is now ripe for total devastation. However, it's the Joker whose rise in this reality is perhaps the most dangerous of all. Without Batman, the Joker's madness spirals even further. Once defined by his relationship with the Dark Knight, the Joker becomes the chaos in Gotham that no one can counter. Without the counterbalance of Batman's resolve, the Joker could amass followers, transforming into an icon of anarchy. His terrorist tactics, once confined to Gotham's underworld, could spill into public life in full force, spreading an ideology of disorder that would rival any organized crime syndicate. Gotham would not only be dealing with mob bosses and politicians in their pockets, but also a city under siege by a madman whose agenda is simply to see everything burn. The Joker's influence, left unchecked, leads to mass chaos. As he targets Gotham's citizens, government institutions, and key infrastructure, the entire city becomes a war zone of uncertainty. Gotham's public trust breaks down, as no one feels safe from the Joker's ever-growing reign of terror. The murderous game of chance the Joker plays with his victims becomes the new norm in Gotham, and the line between criminal and victim becomes increasingly unclear. Amidst all this, Bruce Wayne finds himself consumed by guilt. He might try to hide behind the facade of a successful businessman, but the knowledge that he could have made a difference, that he could have saved Gotham from this fate, eats at him. The guilt of not becoming Batman would begin to consume him, and his wealth and power cannot assuage the ever-growing realization that he has failed the city. His continued existence as Bruce Wayne becomes a reflection of his emptiness and moral failure, as he watches his family legacy disintegrate and Gotham crumble without any action from him. The future of Wayne Enterprises also hangs in the balance. Bruce might attempt to take action in the business world, trying to mitigate the effects of Gotham's collapse through corporate solutions, but without the Dark Avenger guiding the company, its moral and ethical compass is lost. Wayne Enterprises would likely become just another corporate machine focused on profit and influence rather than justice. The corporate board could be easily infiltrated by Gotham's criminal elite, turning the company into a tool of manipulation. Even Bruce's connection to Gotham's political power becomes increasingly corrupted, with his wealth tied to the same forces of greed and corruption that plague the city. The Wayne legacy becomes a shadow of what it could have been, used for self-serving purposes rather than the good of the people. Meanwhile, without Batman to inspire Gotham's youth, figures like Dick Grayson, Robin, and Barbara Gordon Batgirl are left to find their own way in the world. Dick Grayson, without Bruce Wayne's mentorship, might fall prey to the same pitfalls as other disenfranchised youths in Gotham. His fighting skills, once honed under the tutelage of Batman, could be used for personal revenge or even unregulated vigilantism, leading him down a dark path of self-righteousness. Barbara Gordon, on the other hand, might focus more on her personal life or career, seeing Gotham as a place too dangerous and hopeless to make a real difference. Without Batman's guidance, these once heroes might either lose their way or retreat into a world of disillusionment. Ultimately, Gotham's evolution without Batman shifts toward a darker and more dangerous future. The criminal underworld flourishes. The citizens become increasingly disillusioned, and heroes are either corrupted or sidelined. Without Batman's moral clarity and his ability to fight corruption, Gotham becomes a city on the edge of total collapse. The lack of Batman creates a void, one filled by the very chaos and destruction he would have fought against. Gotham, once on the precipice of redemption, now faces an uncertain future where the line between hero and villain becomes indistinguishable. The city might never truly recover without the dark figure that was Batman to protect its soul. As Gotham's spiraling descent continues without Batman, the city becomes a dark reflection of itself. The corruption runs deeper, the criminals more organized, and the innocent increasingly hopeless. Without Batman to stand as a beacon of justice, the darkness that Gotham has always fought against threatens to overwhelm it. The city's very identity becomes one of lawlessness and violence, a place where the will of the people is smothered by the weight of criminal empires and power-hungry elites. Gotham, without its protector, becomes a city without a soul, where fear, despair, and chaos reign supreme. However, amid this growing desperation, new figures emerge. Gotham's citizens, left with no real hope from their government or institutions, begin to take matters into their own hands. These new vigilantes start to rise from the ashes of Gotham's decay, yet, without Batman's moral foundation and discipline, their methods are unpolished and dangerous. Some might even become as corrupt and violent as the criminals they seek to fight, crossing the line between justice and vengeance. Gotham's streets, once filled with the stealthy movements of the Dark Knight, are now littered with heroes who are driven by their own personal agendas and anxieties. One such figure is Dick Grayson, whose rise as Nightwing was once seen as the heir to Batman's legacy. Without Bruce Wayne's guidance, however, Grayson finds himself disillusioned by Gotham's lack of a unifying figure and the overwhelming power of the criminal syndicates. His mission to protect the city becomes fragmented and personal. He may start out with good intentions, but without Batman's discipline, he risks becoming a rogue agent, willing to take drastic actions that could further destabilize Gotham. His guilt over not being able to save Bruce from his own demons leads him to question his role in Gotham's struggle. Likewise, Barbara Gordon, who might have taken on the mantle of Batgirl, finds herself at a crossroads. Without the support and mentorship of Batman, Barbara's commitment to Gotham's protection could be eroded. As Gotham's situation worsens, Batgirl's role as a vigilante could turn into a personal crusade for revenge against the criminals who have overrun her city. She may grow disillusioned with the idea of heroism, leading her down a darker path, one that might even involve working outside the law in a more brutal manner. Barbara might even take on a more punitive role, seeking revenge for the city rather than true justice. Her moral compass, once so clearly defined by Batman's guidance, would be forced to adapt to the corrupt world Gotham has become. Meanwhile, the criminal element within Gotham grows even more emboldened. The Joker, freed from the battle against Batman, evolves into an even more insidious and public figure. Without the shadow of the bat hanging over him, the Joker's chaotic philosophy becomes a public crusade, one that encourages anarchy and insurrection among Gotham's disenfranchised. He becomes a symbol of rebellion, pushing the citizens of Gotham into chaos while mocking the city's institutions that have failed them. The Joker's terrorist acts become more destructive, creating an uncontrollable wave of violence that sweeps across Gotham, further fracturing the city and its people. Even Ra's al Ghul continues his mission to destroy Gotham, seeing the city's state of decline as the perfect opportunity to carry out his plan. The League of Shadows, operating without fear of Batman's interference, might be able to infiltrate Gotham's government and corporations, using them to further their cause. Gotham's infrastructure, already fragile due to corruption, becomes more susceptible to Ra's manipulations. The League could push Gotham toward collapse, forcing the city to face total destruction, believing that only in chaos can Gotham be reborn. Without the leadership of Batman, Wayne Enterprises might continue under Bruce Wayne's guidance, but its direction would shift dramatically. Bruce, still deeply affected by his parents' deaths, might channel his grief into corporate expansion, focusing more on increasing the company's global reach than on fighting for justice in Gotham. Wayne Enterprises might end up as a symbol of Gotham's corruption, used to prop up the criminal elites. Bruce's wealth, now unchecked by the moral compass Batman once provided, might allow him to become even more entrenched in Gotham's political games, further distancing himself from the city's true needs. Without Batman to serve as a moral guide to the heroes and villains of Gotham, the city's future remains uncertain. Its corruption continues to fester, with new vigilantes growing ever more desperate, radical, and dangerous. The lack of a central figure of hope leads to a fractured society where every person is either forced to survive or join the chaos that the criminal underworld has mastered. Even those with the best intentions, like Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon, fall victim to the same darkness that plagues Gotham. They fight back, but often without understanding that true change cannot come without unity, without the symbol of Batman to inspire and lead them. Gotham, in the absence of its protector, is forced to evolve in ways it never should have. The villains, heroes, and citizens all change, and not for the better. The hope that Batman once gave Gotham begins to fade, replaced by a city that is constantly at war with itself. And Bruce Wayne, who had the potential to guide Gotham to a better future, finds himself trapped in a life of moral failure, unable to reconcile his legacy with the ruin that Gotham faces. The symbol of Batman, without ever manifesting, would have served as Gotham's greatest lost hope, a shadow of what might have been and what the city could never have achieved on its own. As Gotham's collapse accelerates in the absence of Batman, the world beyond Gotham begins to take notice. The impact of Bruce Wayne's decision not to embrace the role of Batman reverberates through the broader superhero community. Gotham, once considered a dark hub of villainy and crime, is now a warning for other cities, one where chaos has taken root and flourished. Superheroes, both from near and far, would be forced to reconsider their roles in a world that no longer has a figure like Batman to anchor its fight for justice. The Justice League, which operates on a global scale, feels the absence of one of its most crucial members. While heroes like Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash continue to tackle large-scale threats, they begin to understand that their efforts are no longer as effective as they once were. Batman's tactical mind, his ability to strategize, and his deep understanding of human nature made him an invaluable asset to the Justice League. Without him, the League struggles to coordinate efforts as seamlessly as they once did. They are left in a state of uncertainty, unsure how to proceed when global crises arise, without Batman's ability to see the smaller details that often make all the difference. Without his brilliant detective work, the League begins to feel disjointed, a group of heroes without a shared sense of purpose or direction. Batman's absence leaves a gaping hole in their operations, and they struggle to function at the level they once did. Beyond the Justice League, the absence of Batman also shifts the public perception of superheroes in general. Without a Dark Knight to counter the forces of darkness and chaos that often crop up in the world, superheroes become more controversial figures. Cities across the globe, including Metropolis, Central City, and others, begin to question the role of costumed vigilantes. While Superman may be revered as a hero, his ability to inspire real change remains limited. The public starts to question the effectiveness of superheroes when the absence of one of their greatest minds leaves the world in disarray. The fear that Batman's presence, once counteracted, now creeps into every corner of society. The lack of Batman's example leads to an erosion of faith in the superhero community as a whole. Citizens begin to wonder if these heroes, without the balance Batman brought, might not be so different from the villains they fight. Meanwhile, Gotham itself, bereft of its protector, is left to fend for itself in an increasingly dangerous world. With the criminal element continuing to expand, a new order begins to form within the city's underworld. The mob bosses no longer face a formidable opponent like Batman, and their influence over Gotham's economy, politics, and social institutions becomes absolute. The power of figures like Falcone, Maroni, and Penguin only grows stronger. These villains not only control the streets of Gotham, but also expand into new industries, gaining control of everything from real estate to media outlets. In this new Gotham, the line between the criminal elite and the political elite becomes increasingly blurred. Gotham is no longer just a city of crime. It becomes a city of oppression, where the powerful exploit the vulnerable. However, even in the face of this dark future, there is a glimmer of resilience in the hearts of Gotham's citizens. Though their hope may have waned in the face of escalating violence, some still refuse to give in to despair. Citizen action starts to form in pockets, as groups of individuals begin to organize and resist the rise of criminal power. Gotham's people, once paralyzed by fear, slowly begin to fight back. These grassroots movements, though disorganized and often vulnerable, spark the idea that Gotham is not entirely lost. Normal citizens, inspired by the memory of Batman and the ideal of justice, start to make their voices heard. In this world, new heroes might arise. Gotham might see figures like the Question, Huntress, or even a new, more radical vigilante emerging to challenge the status quo. However, these figures lack the same moral clarity that Batman brought to his role. The lack of unity and shared purpose among Gotham's new protectors creates a fractured effort to restore order. Each vigilante has their own methods, often more brutal than those employed by Batman. Gotham, without a clear leader or example, struggles with disjointed action that may end up exacerbating the problems rather than solving them. Bruce Wayne, still very much present in Gotham but disconnected from his legacy as Batman, finds himself adrift in a world he cannot control. The guilt of never becoming Batman eats at him, and he is forced to face the reality of his choice. As Wayne Enterprises continues its work in Gotham, Bruce's focus on corporate affairs becomes more of an attempt to distract himself from the chaos outside. But this diversion only serves to deepen his emptiness. He begins to question his purpose, knowing deep down that his wealth and resources could have made a real difference had he been Batman. The trauma of losing his parents and never finding a way to avenge their death weighs heavily on him. Bruce may even consider taking up the mantle again, but by now Gotham's darkness has grown so deep that the struggle to reclaim hope feels impossible. The tension between Bruce Wayne and his legacy grows more intense as he watches Gotham spiral further into the hands of crime and destruction. Without the clarity of Batman's moral code, Bruce's efforts become more disjointed and less focused. He becomes increasingly frustrated with his own inability to make a real impact. Wayne Enterprises, once an instrument of change, becomes an afterthought as the real battles take place on Gotham's streets. The absence of Batman also reshapes the dynamic of Gotham's future, as the city continues to face its own demise. Without the symbol of Batman, Gotham might never truly find a way to escape its endless cycle of violence and corruption. New heroes may arise, but none will carry the same moral clarity or inspiration that Batman did. Villains grow in power, and the criminal elite become more entrenched. The GCPD struggles without the insight and strategy that Batman provided, and Bruce Wayne, left to watch it all unfold, is forced to live with the consequences of his decision and the empty legacy he has created. As Gotham's fate becomes increasingly intertwined with its lack of a protector, the consequences of Bruce Wayne's inaction start to affect the city in ways that no one could have predicted. The seeds of chaos that Batman once fought to prevent now take root, spreading through every level of Gotham's society. With each passing day, Gotham becomes less a city of promise and more a graveyard of broken hopes, a reflection of everything Batman tried to save it from. But what Gotham doesn't know is that it is on the brink of something worse, a shift that would come not from outside forces, but from within. Without Batman, the city's descent into corruption becomes a self-sustaining cycle. With Falcone, Maroni, and other crime families firmly entrenched at the heart of Gotham's economy, political structures and underworld, the mafia grows in influence. They have free rein over the city's resources, its media, and even its law enforcement. In the absence of Batman's disruption, the mob's influence extends into every facet of Gotham's life, poisoning the very fabric of the city. Corrupt politicians, once carefully hidden under the cloak of secrecy, become brazen in their manipulation of Gotham's economic systems. The GCPD becomes little more than a puppet for these powerful crime families, unable to take meaningful action against the criminal tide that continues to rise. With Gotham's public institutions crumbling, and no figure to stand as a beacon of resistance, the city starts to experience what Batman tried to prevent: a citywide moral collapse. The Joker, long an agent of chaos, might find himself becoming more of a ringleader than an isolated figure. Without a Batman to challenge him, the Joker's influence becomes global, reaching further than Gotham's borders. His madness, no longer just a personal vendetta against a lone vigilante, becomes a movement, a calling to the disillusioned, the oppressed, and those who have lost faith in the system. The Joker's influence grows, and he rallies those who have given up on Gotham to join his cause, destroying the very foundation of the city itself. Gotham no longer stands as a beacon of hope or even order. It becomes a playground for chaos. Meanwhile, in the void left by Batman, new vigilantes emerge, but none of them carry the moral weight that Batman once did. Some might have good intentions, driven by a sense of justice, but they lack the discipline and strategy that Bruce Wayne perfected as Batman. Instead of inspiring others to rise as Batman did, these new heroes become disjointed, fragmented, and at times even dangerous. Without Batman's guidance, their actions are motivated by personal vendettas, a desire for retribution rather than justice. They might even become as ruthless as the criminals they attempt to stop, and in some cases their methods begin to blur the line between what is right and what is wrong. One of the most profound impacts of Batman's absence is seen in the development of Dick Grayson, who, without Bruce Wayne's guidance, finds himself wandering through a world that demands more than just action, but also accountability. Nightwing, once a hopeful sidekick, finds himself lost without the purpose that Batman gave him. Without the fatherly guidance of Bruce, Nightwing's actions become erratic, torn between personal vengeance and a desire to live up to the ideals Batman set for him. While he might still hold on to the morality Bruce instilled in him, his independence and lack of cohesion with Gotham's fight lead him down a dangerous path. As Gotham's villains rise, it becomes clear that without Batman's balance, they are now able to coordinate and unite in a way that they could never have done with him standing in their way. The mob families cooperate more closely, forming alliances that extend their reach into the very institutions of Gotham. With Batman's absence, figures like the Riddler, Bane, and Poison Ivy gain more autonomy, each carving out their own niche in Gotham's criminal ecosystem. They expand their operations in ways that wouldn't have been possible with Batman still in the picture. Two-Face, in particular, becomes an even more dangerous figure. Without Batman's presence to keep him in check, Harvey Dent's internal conflict spirals out of control. His moral duality grows sharper, and Gotham begins to see the emergence of a more dictatorial figure who rules based on the flip of a coin. His random decisions dictate life and death in the streets, and Gotham's citizens are forced to live in constant fear of his whims. Gotham, once again, becomes a place of unpredictability where chaos reigns supreme, but in a more methodical and planned way, as Two-Face's decisions govern the city's fate. On the corporate side of things, Wayne Enterprises is left with a gaping hole in leadership. Bruce Wayne, deeply impacted by the absence of Batman in his own life, throws himself into his business ventures, but without the moral center Batman provided, his decisions begin to lack the vision that Wayne Enterprises once held. The company begins to shift towards self-serving goals, as Bruce's internal struggles cloud his judgment. Gotham's elite continues to take advantage of Wayne Enterprises' resources, using them to propagate corruption at every level of society. Gotham's public institutions are submerged in corruption, its streets teeming with criminals, and its people desperate for some form of salvation. But no one steps forward to fill the void left by Batman. There are no clear answers for how Gotham can be saved. The absence of Batman means there's no one to bring the city together, no one to remind them that justice can still be achieved, no one to push them past the darkness. This lack of leadership allows Gotham to descend further into despair, with its citizens caught between two forces: the criminals who control the streets and the government that is either too corrupt or ineffectual to make any real change. Hope becomes a fleeting memory, a ghost of Gotham's past. Gotham itself begins to feel like a cage, where the people are trapped, helpless, and unable to break free from the chains of corruption, crime, and injustice. But all is not lost. New heroes might eventually rise, though they will be far from perfect. They will face the hard truths that Gotham is too far gone, and no single person can undo the damage that has already been done. However, the people of Gotham, inspired by Batman's memory and the realization that they must fight for themselves, might come together and form a new resistance, one that, while fractured and imperfect, might still be able to reclaim the soul of Gotham. As Gotham continues to drift deeper into its dark future without Batman, the battle for the city's soul intensifies. In the wake of Gotham's rapid collapse, the new heroes who rise up to fill the void left by the Dark Knight are far from the flawless defenders Gotham once hoped for. These individuals, ordinary citizens who find themselves emboldened by the spirit of resistance, each carry their own personal motives, flaws, and visions for justice. The lack of Batman's mentorship, his moral code, and his strategic mind causes these new figures to struggle with their missions and the challenges of fighting a city consumed by crime, corruption, and anarchy. Some of these new vigilantes come from the city's marginalized and oppressed population. They are ordinary citizens who have been forced to survive in Gotham's ruthless world, often pushed to the brink by the criminal forces that govern their lives. Their desire to make a change, to finally stand up against the powers that oppress them, fuels their actions. But without Batman to provide guidance, they tend to act out of impulse and emotion, driven by personal revenge or the need to be seen as heroes, rather than with a clear vision of what real justice entails. One such hero could be a figure like the Question, a masked vigilante who relies on intellect and investigation to uncover the truth. However, without Batman's guidance, the Question's methods become increasingly unpredictable. He digs deeper into Gotham's web of corruption, but his pursuit of the truth becomes more obsessive, and he finds himself increasingly isolated, questioning his own motives and whether he is truly serving the public good. The question's actions, which may once have been focused on revealing the hidden evils of the city, now threaten to unravel the very fabric of society, as his relentless pursuit of justice turns into a personal vendetta against anyone he believes is complicit in Gotham's decay. Huntress, a vigilante whose tragic past mirrors some of Batman's own experiences, also finds herself at the crossroads of this fractured justice. She might have once been motivated by a desire to honor Batman's memory, but without the self-restraint Batman possessed, she could slip into more dangerous methods of enforcement. Her journey becomes one of self-discovery as she wrestles with the tension between revenge and justice. While she fights for Gotham's safety, her actions blur the line between protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty, and she struggles to come to terms with her own role in the growing chaos around her. Huntress's path may become one of self-destruction, as her inability to cope with Gotham's moral decay pushes her further into isolation and despair. Meanwhile, the Joker's influence continues to grow. His chaos becomes the very essence of Gotham's future, his presence looming over the city like an ever-present shadow. The Jokerification of Gotham, where chaos and anarchy reign, accelerates. The Joker's insanity becomes a philosophy, one that gains followers in the city's darkest corners, a cult-like following that embraces the idea that chaos is the only truth worth pursuing. Gotham, once again, becomes the Joker's playground, and the more he destroys, the more he gains power over Gotham's citizens. His terror goes beyond physical destruction, as his mental manipulation breaks down the will of Gotham's citizens, forcing them to see the world as he does, irreparably broken and beyond saving. Gotham's new heroes, fragmented and disjointed, struggle to combat these rising threats, but their lack of leadership and unity only creates more opportunity for the criminal underworld to expand. Figures like Penguin become more powerful than ever before. Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin, once just a minor player in Gotham's crime scene, rises to power in the absence of Batman. As the city's elite remains entrenched in corruption, Penguin's business acumen, combined with his ruthlessness, allows him to control Gotham's underworld like never before. He manipulates the political system, controls the economy, and consolidates power over the criminal factions with ease. His influence over Gotham grows as he weaves his web through Gotham's corporate elite, extending his reach into the very heart of the city's most powerful institutions. Ra's al Ghul, Sitha the patient strategist, continues to plot his long-term plans for Gotham's destruction. His belief in the need to destroy Gotham to remake it anew grows more convincing as the city's decline accelerates. Without Batman to stand in his way, Ra's might succeed in his ultimate mission of total annihilation, believing that the city's moral rot can only be corrected through complete destruction and the imposition of his new order. Gotham could face total ruin at the hands of Ra's, his League of Shadows infiltrating the city's government, businesses, and infrastructure, pushing Gotham toward a final cataclysm. And then there is Bruce Wayne himself, the man who could have been the savior of Gotham, yet chose to remain in the shadows of his wealth, power, and privilege. Without the disguise of Batman, Bruce begins to realize that he might have been just as complicit in Gotham's decline as the criminals he once fought against. His moral compass wavers in the face of his guilt and the growing realization that, had he become Batman, Gotham might have had a chance to rise above the corruption and chaos that now define it. He watches helplessly as his parents' legacy, the Wayne family name, becomes a tool for corruption, used by the very criminals he sought to fight. The dark realization sets in: without Batman, Bruce Wayne's legacy means very little in the grand scheme of Gotham's inevitable collapse. He becomes a shadow of his former self, trapped in the world of corporate power without the chance to use it for good. His wealth could have been a force for change, but in his reluctance to act, he becomes nothing more than an apathetic observer. Even if he tried to put forth some effort to reclaim Gotham, the damage has already been done. Gotham's soul, the very spirit that Batman had always fought for, has been destroyed by the city's greed and criminality. In the end, Gotham finds itself on the edge of oblivion, a city that once had hope, but now falls deeper into despair. Without the guiding influence of Batman, Gotham's descent is complete. The villains control the streets, the corrupt elites control the politics, and the citizens are left to pick up the pieces, scattered and broken by years of mismanagement and failed attempts at justice. Bruce Wayne, without his alter ego, finds himself facing the truth. He could have saved Gotham, but in his failure to act, he allowed it to destroy itself. As Gotham spirals further into chaos and ruin, the ripples of Batman's absence continue to affect the city in ways that no one could have foreseen. The absence of Batman has not only left a vacuum of leadership and hope, but has also exposed the city's darkest corners, where even the smallest cracks in the foundation widen into gaping chasms of moral decay. Gotham, once a city teetering on the edge of collapse, now seems to embrace its fate. The relentless war between order and chaos continues without a clear victor, as Gotham's streets remain a battlefield not of crime fighters and villains, but of survival and desperation. As the new heroes in Gotham struggle to hold on to whatever semblance of justice they can muster, they are forced to confront the realization that their individual efforts, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot change the systemic rot that has taken root in every corner of the city. Nightwing, once a symbol of hope in Gotham, finds himself increasingly disillusioned with the idea of heroism in a city where the lines between good and evil have become blurred. Huntress, driven by her own need for vengeance, steps deeper into the shadows, questioning whether her actions are truly serving the greater good, or whether they are simply another form of corruption. Gotham's new vigilantes, while undeniably courageous, are forced to realize that individual acts of heroism in a city as broken as Gotham are often nothing more than temporary fixes for problems that require a much deeper change. The public perception of superheroes begins to shift as well. Gotham's citizens, once inspired by the symbol of Batman, now find themselves uncertain of who they can trust. The rise of chaos and the fracturing of Gotham's resistance forces many to question the very idea of heroism. In a city so defined by moral ambiguity, the distinction between villain and hero becomes increasingly difficult to make. Without the guiding presence of Batman, Gotham's heroes are left adrift in a world that no longer makes sense. They are forced to confront the brutal reality that heroes are just as flawed as the criminals they fight. This is especially true of Gotham's most dangerous villains. Without Batman to challenge them, the criminal element grows in strength and influence. Falcone's crime syndicate becomes even more powerful, spreading its tendrils into every aspect of Gotham's business, politics, and society. The mob families, once confined to the underbelly of the city, now operate with impunity in the open. The elite of Gotham, who once feared Batman's unpredictable methods, are now emboldened, using their connections and power to maintain control. Gotham's government and corporate structures are controlled by a small circle of criminals who no longer have to hide behind the veil of legitimate authority. As these new villains rise, Gotham faces a new threat, one far more insidious than anything it has seen before. Ra's al Ghul, without the interference of Batman, begins to enact his plan for total destruction and rebirth. He views Gotham's corruption as the root cause of the city's decay and believes that it must be wiped away to make room for a new world order. Reyes continues his efforts to infiltrate Gotham's financial, political, and military institutions, working in the shadows to bring about his vision of order through destruction. But without Batman's strategic mind and relentless pursuit of justice, Reyes may find himself unopposed, pushing Gotham to the brink of complete annihilation. The Joker, too, flourishes in a world where Batman's moral compass no longer exists. Freed from the psychological battle with his nemesis, the Joker becomes more dangerous, more calculated in his actions. His once chaotic approach to crime becomes purposeful as he seeks to reshape Gotham into a reflection of his madness. The Joker's reign of terror spreads to the city's heart, where his anarchic philosophy infects the minds of the disillusioned. He becomes not just a villain, but a symbol of Gotham's decay, a figurehead for those who believe the only true freedom lies in destruction. Gotham's future grows bleaker, and the hope that Batman once provided is replaced with the fear of a world where heroes are as flawed as the villains they oppose. Gotham's downfall becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. Criminals gain power, and the heroes are either compromised, isolated, or lost in their quest to do what's right. Bruce Wayne, no longer the figurehead of a potential rebirth, watches from the sidelines as his legacy unravels. Wayne Enterprises continues, but it is now just another corporate tool in a city driven by greed and power. Bruce, once driven by a desire for justice, finds himself more disconnected from Gotham than ever before. His tragic choices haunt him, and he is left with a growing realization that he might have been the city's only chance to ever escape the fate that now seems inevitable. However, Gotham, like its protector, has always had a resilient spirit, one that cannot be entirely extinguished. Even as the criminal elite rise to power and the villains play their final game, the citizens of Gotham, the unsung heroes, begin to organize in their own way. While it's too late for one man to save the city, perhaps the combined efforts of Gotham's residents could begin to shift the tide. Though Batman's shadow may have disappeared, the moral fiber he instilled in Gotham's people may still provide the glimmer of hope needed to spark a rebirth. The city's spirit cannot be fully crushed, and as citizens begin to fight back, a new resistance begins to rise. Gotham's people, having lived in the darkness for so long, know that change is possible, even if it comes at a cost. New heroes might emerge, not as figures who wear a mask or fight with superhuman strength, but as ordinary people who refuse to surrender to the forces of chaos. The idea of justice, of hope, might still endure in the hearts of the common folk of Gotham. As Gotham's descent into chaos continues, the ripple effect extends beyond the walls of the city. While Bruce Wayne's legacy and Gotham's future hang in the balance, something more profound begins to take shape. The awakening of Gotham's true spirit. The resistance that starts to form within Gotham isn't just about fighting back against the corruption, it's about reclaiming the city's very soul. In the absence of Batman, Gotham's people are forced to recognize that change doesn't come from one person's vigilant mission, but from a collective effort of those who refuse to let the city fall into the hands of darkness. The new resistance grows from the cracks in Gotham's broken streets, ordinary citizens coming together to fight for what's right. They might not have the training or tools that Batman once had, but they share something more powerful, a sense of unity and a shared purpose. They come from all walks of life, teachers, nurses, street vendors, and blue-collar workers, each driven by their own personal reasons for fighting back. Some are motivated by loss, others by a deep-rooted desire to see Gotham rise from its ruin. But together they begin to form the basis of a new kind of heroism that doesn't rely on the myth of one person, but on the collective will of a city that refuses to die. This movement is different from any that has come before it. Rather than focusing on direct confrontation with Gotham's criminal overlords, the resistance seeks to change the city from within, starting with its people. They organize neighborhood patrols, community initiatives, and public education campaigns, trying to instill a sense of self-worth in Gotham's citizens. These efforts are small, incremental, and often met with violence and resistance from Gotham's criminal underworld, but over time they begin to chip away at the pervasive hopelessness that has defined the city for so long. In the midst of this transformation, figures like Nightwing and Batgirl continue their own personal struggles. Nightwing, having embraced his role as Gotham's protector, finds himself at a crossroads. The city is changing, and so is his role in it. His past as Robin and his mentorship under Batman weigh heavily on him. There's a deep part of Dick Grayson that wants to be the Batman Gotham needs, but he's forced to recognize that Batman's way of doing things, the vengeance, the isolation, the obsession with control, cannot work in a city that needs to heal from the trauma of years of abuse. Nightwing's journey becomes about more than just fighting crime. It's about helping the people reclaim their city and their lives. Meanwhile, Barbara Gordon, struggling with the absence of her mentor, finds herself at the center of Gotham's growing resistance. She no longer wears the mask of Batgirl as a shadow of Batman's legacy, but has come to understand that Gotham doesn't need another vigilante. It needs a voice of leadership and hope. Barbara takes on the role of organizing and coordinating the efforts of the resistance, using her intelligence and tactical mind to organize protests, rallies, and movements that give Gotham's people a reason to believe in justice again. Her journey is one of self-discovery as she steps into the role of someone who can inspire Gotham's citizens without the shadow of Batman looming over her. While Gotham's people begin to find their own way, the villains that once defined the city face a new challenge. Without Batman, their power has grown, but so has their vulnerability. Ra's al Ghul, once confident in his plan to destroy Gotham, begins to see the people's resistance as a direct threat to his vision of rebirth through destruction. His League of Shadows infiltrates Gotham's corrupt political system, but the growing unity within the city begins to disrupt his plan. Gotham's resilience, which Ra's never anticipated, threatens to thwart his ambitions. He realizes that even in the absence of Batman, Gotham cannot be destroyed so easily. The symbol of hope that Batman represented might have faded, but the spirit of Gotham cannot be extinguished. The Joker, too, faces the consequences of his unchecked chaos. In a world without Batman, his madness would have found fertile ground to grow, but now he faces a new challenge, a city that no longer stands paralyzed by fear. The anarchy he seeks to create is no longer a weapon of manipulation, but a dangerous force that threatens to consume him. Without Batman as his reflection, the Joker finds himself without the same catharsis and purpose. He becomes a symbol of destruction without an opposing force of order, and his eventual fate becomes one of self-destruction as his obsession with chaos drives him into a spiral that no longer serves a greater purpose. In the end, Gotham begins to rebuild itself, not through the actions of one dark night, but through the collective efforts of its citizens. Gotham's resilience becomes its greatest weapon, and the idea that the city's soul can still be reclaimed gives it the strength to fight back against the forces of corruption and chaos that have ruled it for so long. The people of Gotham, once too afraid to act, rise together and push back against the criminal elite that has dominated the city for so many years. They begin to see that justice isn't something that comes from one hero in a mask, but from the unity of everyone fighting together. Bruce Wayne, finally coming to terms with his legacy, realizes that Gotham's true hope lies not in one individual's crusade, but in the collective strength of the city's people. Wayne Enterprises, once a symbol of corporate greed, transforms into a beacon for change, a resource for the people who have risen up to rebuild their city. Bruce's journey ends not in tragedy, but in understanding that the city he failed to save is capable of saving itself, with the right guidance and unity. In the end, Gotham becomes something new, a city that still bears the scars of its past, but is no longer defined by the darkness that once claimed it. The absence of Batman did not bring the city's end, but rather it allowed the people of Gotham to become the true heroes they always had the potential to be. The spirit of Gotham lives on, not in one individual but in the strength of community, the power of hope, and the collective desire to build something better from the ruins. As Gotham continues its slow but steady transformation, the city begins to reflect a new kind of hope, a hope that isn't born from the shadow of one man, but from the collective efforts of its people. The spirit of Gotham has always been about survival, but now it shifts toward growth, healing, and rebirth. The events that have unfolded, from the rise of Gotham's vigilantes to the collapse of the criminal elite, have shaped the city into a place where even the darkest times can give birth to light. Gotham's citizens take center stage in this new world, empowered by the realization that they are the ones who can rebuild the city they call home. Community leaders rise from the ashes, not as superheroes in capes, but as ordinary people who are committed to the long-term healing of their city. Street gangs, once controlled by the likes of Falcone and Maroni, begin to fracture and dissipate, replaced by neighborhood watch groups and citizen patrols. The GCPD, still struggling with its own corruption, becomes more reliable as these grassroots efforts gain traction and the citizens of Gotham realize that their best chance at redemption lies in unity and collaboration. Nightwing and Batgirl still patrol the streets, but their missions have evolved. Dick Grayson, no longer merely a shadow of Batman, takes on a more mature role as a mentor and leader in Gotham. His presence shifts from vigilante to a figure that embodies hope and resilience. He now works more closely with community organizations, focusing on training and empowering Gotham's youth to stand up for their city, while Batgirl leads the efforts to restore the Gotham Police Department's integrity and institutional trust. Their partnership with Gotham's people creates a new dynamic of crime fighting that is less about personal revenge and more about collaborative justice. While Gotham rises, the villains who once ruled the city are left to grapple with their own demise. Ra's al Ghul, whose desire to rebuild Gotham through destruction, finds himself increasingly isolated. His League of Shadows has lost its influence. As Gotham's citizens rise up against his ideals, his destruction of the city, which once seemed inevitable, now feels like a far-off dream. Gotham has found its own path toward healing, and Ra's al Ghul, the once invincible figure, finds his influence waning. The Joker, whose madness and chaos once ruled Gotham, now faces an entirely new world. With Batman gone and Gotham itself finding its strength, the Joker no longer has the counterbalance that kept him in check. His obsession with chaos grows. But without the Dark Knight to oppose him, his anarchy begins to lose its edge. The public's growing resistance and unity push the Joker into the margins of society, where his acts of terrorism no longer hold the same weight. He becomes a figure that no longer embodies Gotham's chaos, but instead a relic of a time when Gotham's fate seemed locked in a perpetual cycle of violence. The Joker's madness, without a purpose or enemy, begins to consume itself, and his role in Gotham's future is one of decline. Meanwhile, Wayne Enterprises, under Bruce Wayne's careful but distant leadership, finds itself adapting to this new world. Without Batman, Bruce has had to come to terms with the moral weight of his choices. Though his company thrives, it does so now with a focus on rebuilding Gotham from within. Wayne Enterprises invests heavily in community development projects, healthcare initiatives, and public infrastructure, reorienting its resources to align with a new vision for Gotham. Bruce's journey comes full circle as he begins to see that true change cannot come from one man's crusade, but from the collective efforts of those who are willing to give and build. While Bruce's legacy as Batman will never be forgotten, it is his impact on Gotham's future as a philanthropist and community leader that will define his place in the city's story. As Gotham's new heroes take center stage, Gotham itself is reborn. Its streets, once soaked in fear and corruption, now become symbols of resilience and community. Crime, while still present, is no longer a looming shadow over the city. The crime families that once held sway are now diminished, fractured by the rise of new leaders and resistance groups. Gotham's people begin to realize that true power lies not in the hands of the criminals or the elite, but in their own collective will. However, Gotham's transformation is not without its challenges. The legacy of Batman will continue to haunt the city, as will the memory of those who fell victim to the cruelty of its past. The wounds of Gotham's trauma are still fresh, and the city's recovery is far from guaranteed. But Gotham's spirit, its heart, begins to beat with a new rhythm. Justice is no longer about vengeance or fear, but about the unifying force of the people. Gotham begins to see that healing is possible, even in a city that has been defined by so much pain and violence. As Gotham moves into the future, it becomes a testament to resilience. Gotham, without Batman, has shown the world that it can rise above the corruption and chaos that once ruled it. The legacy of the Dark Knight is not in his crusade against crime, but in the collective strength he helped instill in Gotham's people. Gotham, in the end, finds its own redemption, not in one man's fight, but in the fight of its citizens who have chosen to reclaim their city. As Gotham begins its path toward healing and recovery, the city finds itself navigating a new era, one that is shaped by the decisions and actions of its people rather than a singular hero. The criminal underworld, once dominant, now faces increasing resistance, not just from the Gotham Police Department, but from citizens themselves. The city has learned to reclaim its power, not through force or fear, but by the unity and resolve of those who once thought they had no voice in the battle for the future of their home. The role of Bruce Wayne continues to evolve, and with it, his understanding of his place in Gotham's story. While he no longer wears the mask of Batman, his commitment to Gotham's recovery remains steadfast. Wayne Enterprises, once a symbol of corporate wealth and elitism, now becomes a powerful tool for social change. Bruce's influence within the city grows, not through his financial prowess, but through his philanthropic efforts and the empowering initiatives he champions for Gotham's future. Bruce may have failed to act as Batman, but his newfound commitment to the people of Gotham proves to be the catalyst for its eventual rebirth. Wayne Enterprises, led by Bruce Wayne, reinvests in Gotham's neighborhoods, pouring resources into education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The once decaying city becomes a breeding ground for innovation, with Bruce using his platform to create jobs, develop public works, and build a future for Gotham that is no longer held hostage by the criminal syndicates that once controlled its fate. Gotham's elite may still wield influence, but they no longer hold the same sway over the city's direction. The people begin to feel like they have a say in their own futures. Bruce, too, finds himself reconnecting with Gotham, not as a distant observer but as a man deeply committed to the city's survival. However, the scars of Gotham's past are never far from the surface. The criminal underworld, though weakened, still holds power. The mob families may no longer rule the streets with the same iron grip, but they are far from defeated. They may have lost their ruthless leaders like Falcone and Maroni, but their remnants still persist, operating in the shadows. Even as Wayne Enterprises leads the way in reconstruction, the mob's tentacles reach into Gotham's underground economy, exploiting the most vulnerable and weakening Gotham's resolve from within. The systemic corruption that has plagued the city for decades is not so easily removed. Though the fight against crime has shifted to the people, there remains a battle between power and equity, between the old ways and the new, emerging Gotham. In this new world, figures like Nightwing, Batgirl, and the emerging new vigilantes find their roles continuously shifting. Dick Grayson, while still operating under the guise of Nightwing, begins to take a more active role in the political landscape of Gotham. He shifts from being merely a shadowy protector of the streets to an outspoken advocate for change. Gotham's people begin to look at Nightwing not just as a crime fighter, but as a symbol of their resilience. His influence becomes more than that of just another vigilante. He becomes an ally to the community, a person who works with the city's residents, guiding them toward a future where Gotham belongs to them. Barbara Gordon, who had once been defined by her role as Batgirl, now steps into the role of a leader in Gotham's rebuilding efforts. Her work with the Gotham Police Department becomes a bridge between the law and the public, restoring trust and integrity to an institution that had once been a breeding ground for corruption. Batgirl's journey toward becoming a symbol of reform rather than just a vigilante marks the evolution of Gotham's fight for justice. Batgirl and Nightwing, no longer confined to the shadows, find themselves at the forefront of a movement to reclaim Gotham, to make the city's spirit a beacon of hope that shines through the darkness. Despite these strides toward recovery, the Joker's shadow continues to hang over the city. Though his power has been diminished, he has not disappeared. Gotham is still vulnerable to the madness and chaos that the Joker represents. In this altered reality, the Joker finds himself disillusioned with the chaos that once defined him. Without Batman, the Joker's purpose feels less defined. No longer engaged in his eternal struggle with the Dark Knight, he seeks new meaning in a world that no longer fears him in the same way. Gotham, having started to heal, represents the very thing the Joker has always fought against: order. His insanity, once focused on his relationship with Batman, becomes a dangerous pursuit to undo the very hope that is now emerging in Gotham. The Joker, lacking a true antagonist, turns his focus on the city itself, attempting to destabilize the unity and recovery that has begun to take hold. As the new Gotham continues to rebuild itself, it does so under a new philosophy, a philosophy of unity over division, of community over individual heroism. Gotham, in its struggle to survive, has learned that true strength comes from within. Batman may have been the symbol of individual action, but Gotham, in the absence of that figure, discovers that it can rise together. The once fractured city begins to heal, not by fighting the villains that plagued it, but by embracing its own power, its own will, and its own resolve to build a better future. In this way, Bruce Wayne's legacy transcends the Dark Knight. Gotham, while still haunted by its dark history, moves forward with the collective strength of those who refuse to give up on the city. Bruce may never have become Batman, But the people of Gotham have, in their own way, become the heroes they needed all along. Gotham's future lies in the hands of its people, not in the shadow of one man, but in the unity of a community willing to fight for a better tomorrow. As Gotham streets begin to feel the shift brought about by the collective effort of its people, the city, though scarred and battered, shows signs of hope emerging from the rubble. Gotham, once a place of constant darkness where fear reigned and crime flourished unchecked, finds itself transforming into a city where its residents reclaim control over their destiny. The absence of Batman, the shadowy protector who had kept Gotham's chaos at bay, forced the city to adapt in ways no one could have predicted. With Bruce Wayne's legacy as both a symbol of failure and potential, Gotham has learned to move beyond the reliance on a single hero. The spirit of Gotham lies in the resilience of its people, those who refuse to surrender to the overwhelming forces of crime and corruption. Figures like Nightwing and Batgirl, who had once fought in the shadows of Batman's influence, now take center stage as leaders in the city's recovery, guiding its people toward a new vision of justice, one that is based not on the individual but on the strength of the community. Through their actions, Gotham begins to heal, brick by brick, street by street. The rebuilding of the city is not simply a matter of restoring infrastructure, but also of reclaiming a sense of hope and purpose. The resistance from ordinary citizens, empowered by the absence of Batman, shows that Gotham is no longer a city that needs to look up to one man. Instead, the people of Gotham have found that they can stand together, fight together, and ultimately shape their future together. But even as Gotham moves toward healing, the lingering specter of its dark past remains, reminding its citizens that true recovery requires constant vigilance. The villains, particularly the Joker, Ra's al Ghul, and the remnants of the criminal syndicates, will never fully vanish. Gotham's fight for justice is not over, but it is no longer defined by a solitary figure in a mask. Gotham's greatest strength now lies in the unity of its people, who understand that true change comes from the collective, from standing together against the forces of corruption, chaos, and evil. For Bruce Wayne, his journey shifts from vigilante justice to philanthropic renewal. His legacy evolves into something far more profound than the Dark Knight ever was. No longer haunted by his personal trauma, Bruce becomes a symbol of redeemed purpose, using his wealth and influence to rebuild Gotham, not just through money, but through the hearts and minds of the people. His commitment to Gotham is no longer in the shadows of a batsuit, but in the real, tangible work of transforming Gotham into a city where the will of the people prevails. Gotham's evolution into a place of hope marks the end of an era. The city once defined by Batman's dark presence is now defined by the people's resilience. In the face of unimaginable odds, Gotham has finally learned the hardest lesson, that hope, justice, and change do not rely on one individual but on the united will of those who refuse to give up. Gotham's soul is no longer tied to the shadow of Batman, but rather it is alive in the hearts of its citizens who have taken control of their own future. And though Batman's shadow will forever remain part of Gotham's history, it is now the city's future that matters. A future forged not in the darkness of a single crusader, but in the light of a community that has found strength in unity and the will to rise above its darkest moments.